Hey folks, welcome to the Movies by Month for February 2021. So let's just jump straight into the films that I watched this month. So first up this month was an Amazon Prime film I saw called Strigoi. Now, in case you're not overly familiar with Eastern European mythology, a Strigoi is basically another word for a supernatural thing. I mean, there's lots of different types of them, but think of the film V that I saw last year. Actually, don't think about it because it was terrible. But yeah, anyway, this film, Strigoi, rather than being a creepy horror film or a terrible action movie, this is more like a black comedy. And it feels kind of like something like sort of a low-rent film in the vein of Shaun of the Dead, or a bit more like Bad Day for the Cut, or even sillier than that. And it's all about a guy called Vlad. He's like a young guy who's just come back from working in Paris, where he went to become a doctor. But he ended up just working in a fast food restaurant and became disenchanted with everything and came back home again. Only when he gets back, he finds out the locals are acting kind of weird and holding a vigil over a dead guy who appears to have been strangled to death. And weirder still, Vlad's name is actually the signatory on the death certificate. So it's up to him to kind of figure out what on earth's going on and get to the bottom of all this craziness. And it's actually pretty good fun. I mean, the laughs are genuine, the comic timing's great, and the film's almost entirely in English, which helps a huge amount, but I'm only giving it about 3 out of 5 because despite it being fairly solid and quite funny, it meanders about all over the place, and it could have been an awful lot tighter with a bit more of a cohesive ending. Not that you'll have a bad time with it, but you might find yourself just going, "What?" quite a few times, but with a few plot points towards the end of the film, and maybe checking your watch a couple of times around about the 2/3 mark. But still, definitely well worth checking out. Next up was a new Netflix movie that dropped this month, one that I actually really enjoyed, and that was The Dig, which is a dramatisation of a true story of the Hutton Sioux archaeological dig back in 1939. Now, it's quite a charming little film with Ralph Fiennes and Carey Mulligan as Basil Brown the excavator and Edith Pretty, the sickly but well-to-do widow that owns the land that the Barrow site is on. And they managed to get on really well despite very big differences between their class and their personalities. But as the film progresses, it becomes clear that there's actually something pretty special about what's buried at the site, and that then means that real archaeologists start to roll in. You know, the university-educated, bookish, upper-class guys who scoff at Basil's self-taught skills and, his working-class upbringing, and they shun him from the work, despite most of the legwork actually being done by him. And there's also kind of simultaneously, there's a pretty sweet love story between Lily James and Johnny Flynn, all contrasted with her husband Ben Chaplin and his secret lover, who I've just realised is literally the bad guy from The Witcher. Yeah, that's why he looks familiar. So there you go. And to be honest, if there's anything about the film that doesn't quite ring true, it's that the film tries to make Lily James look a bit dowdy, and that's absolutely bloody ridiculous because she is one of the most beautiful people I've ever seen. But still, 4 out of 5 for me because this is a really sweet, gentle, quiet, contemplative film that tugs the heartstrings in the right places and genuinely is quite fascinating to watch, and you really do learn a little bit about something about archaeology and about history. So yeah, definitely this gets a recommendation. Another film set around World War II that I picked up was actually this Blu-ray release from the Criterion Collection, and that was this old Russian film from the 1970s called The Ascent. And it's a black and white World War II movie about Russian partisans having a bit of a bad time of it out in the forests in Siberia, because God knows, I hadn't tortured myself enough recently with stuff like that over the last little while. And the film's all about a pair of soldiers who head out to find food and supplies for the rest of their group, constantly meeting locals who get caught between the needs of these partisans and also the occupying German armies, both of whom are just about as likely to shoot them. And anyway, the guys end up getting caught and interrogated by the Nazis and the local turncoat police force. And what's really interesting about the movie is the first half of it is basically kind of a traditional war movie about these two guys going about, and then the latter half turns into something a bit more like a stage play where more and more it becomes obvious that this is actually like a passion play, which is basically like, a bloody and harsh reenactment of the crucifixion. So something like Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ is probably the most obvious example of that. But in this case, it's more allegorical. It's all about the duality of Sotnikov, who basically is Jesus, and Ryback, who ends up turning out to be Judas. And it's really good. It's genuinely really good, like 5 out of 5 good. I mean, if there's any letdown, it might be occasionally that some of the camera work looks a bit shonky, but I actually think that might be genuinely intentional as part of the film. So yeah, I mean, this is one for war movie buffs and fans of interesting Soviet-era cinema. Definitely, if that's your bag, check this out. Now, as I've said often, sometimes I watch really good stuff and sometimes I watch absolute garbage. And Caroushell, which is my next movie, get it? It's like a carousel but from hell. Yeah, it falls definitely into the garbage category. Now, this is a low-budget film from Amazon Prime that was clearly shot for about $100 in his mum and dad's house by a guy with a few of his pals. And it feels like something that's a bit of a rip-off trauma movie, and it's all about a carousel horse. Now, stick with me because this gets crazy. He's a carousel horse that has the soul of a Nazi murderer that's being watched over by like a magical cowboy guy. And one day the horse gets really angry and breaks free when an annoying kid wipes his bogies over it and sneezes on it and stuff. So then this horse or unicorn or whatever goes on this murderous rampage across town trying to kill this kid, who happens to be at a house party that his sex-mad sister's gone to. And the rest of the movie is the unicorn trying to get inside and all manner of murders happening, and in between terrible, terrible scenes of the party and really unfunny stuff that gets beaten into the ground with terrible running jokes, like one about a pair of incestuous French Canadians and how like the kid's sister wants to desperately sleep with the pizza guy who can't leave until he gets paid for the pizza. He also happens to be played by the director, and it's awful, like 2 out of 5 awful. I mean, the only good thing about this is actually the special effects, like the practical gore effects, are really, really well done. And despite the film's jokes falling flat, there is a couple of decent bits that will have you giggling, so 2 stars at least for that. But those moments are so few and far between. And the film is literally just over an hour long, and yet it somehow feels much longer. So, no, this is not a recommendation, unless this is absolutely the kind of thing that you love, and you can put up with films that are pretty terrible. Another film that comes from the cheap end of the horror world, but is vastly better than Caroushell, was this slightly obscure folk horror movie called Sator. Much like Caroushell, this was filmed made on an absolute shoestring by a handful of pals, but apparently the director spent 6 years working on it after he finished shooting the movie. And it's turned out to be really worth it because it's genuinely quite good. Now, it's the story of this guy who's almost mute, who hangs out in a hunting lodge owned by his family, occasionally getting visited by his brother. Now, that's when the pair of them don't go to visit their old gran, who's kind of mental. And the gran always talks about the family secret and how people in the family get whispered to by this wood spirit called Sator. And the whole film's really creepy. I mean, it's just creepy and weird and spooky, and that's not bad for a film that was basically shot mostly either in his gran's house, the woods outside, or a cabin he built in his back garden out of a bunch of wooden pallets.
Wooden pallets!
Now, the film does have a few issues, in some ways because some of the dialogue has been quite badly dubbed in some scenes over existing shots, but honestly, I'd give this 4 out of 5. Especially considering the tiny budget and how actually great it looks in the end, and how genuinely unsettling this movie is. I mean, this is a proper give you nightmares kind of movie. So yeah, if you like sort of folk horror stuff set in the woods, Blair Witch kind of things, this is definitely one for you. And at the complete opposite end of things in terms of filmmaking, I also saw The Grand Budapest Hotel, which is just amazing. I mean, it's from Wes Anderson, who made the Darjeeling Limited, the one about 3 brothers on a train holiday in India, and Steve Zissou, The Life Aquatic, which is a kind of bizarre homage to Jacques Cousteau. But Grand Budapest is all about Zero the lobby boy, and how he learns the hotel trade from Gustave, the horny old rich woman chasing concierge. But then they get into crazy escapades when one of the old women dies unexpectedly and leaves a painting to Gustave. Then he gets blamed by the angry family who really did the murder, and it all goes kind of bonkers with jailbreaks, ski chases, and all kinds of nonsense. And it's 5 out of 5, amazing looking, amazingly funny, great fun to watch, and yeah, just a fantastic movie. And what really worked for me is that the whole film has this strange boxy look, and like square framed with an interesting colour scheme, because the story's being told by old Zero to a novelist, so the whole thing is kind of fantastical. And it kind of resembles the cake boxes that Zero's girlfriend Agatha used to make. Anyway, it's amazing. Seek it out. I cannot recommend this enough. You will absolutely love this film if you haven't seen it already. So yeah, Grand Budapest Hotel. Probably so far my recommendation of the year, or whichever year it was that it came out. Next film that I watched was actually one that's part of the Glasgow Film Festival, which is currently running from basically the end of February right through until mid-March. And this was a film called Father. Not to be confused with the upcoming film called The Father, which is about Anthony Hopkins as an old man coping with dementia, which just looks heartbreaking and amazing. Anyway, this film is actually a multi-European film about a dirt poor Serbian labourer who has his kids taken away when his wife tries to kill herself trying to get money that he was owed after he got fired. And he ends up taking a trek all the way across Serbia, like 300 kilometres on foot to Belgrade, to try and give the Minister of Social Matters some kind of letter of appeal. And it's a film that really tugs on your heartstrings because it's a kind of plausible story of a good man trying to fight the hard fight against society that just doesn't care, and coming up against corruption and people changing the rules on him constantly. And all he wants to do is work hard and look after his family, who he loves. So yeah, I mean 4 out of 5 for this film because it genuinely is very, very good. But it does lose some marks for being far too long. And that also goes on in individual scenes. Like, even just the opening scene goes on way too long. It's just a shot of them walking down the street, or the mum and the kids walking down the street. But yeah, the whole film is a bit too long and slightly unbalanced pacing-wise. And it has a couple of moments where it descends into almost weird farcical comedy, a bit along the lines of something like Strigoi, where you're thinking, where does this fit? But still, genuinely, this is a very good film, and yeah, I don't know when it comes out for proper, but I definitely want to have a look for. And my last film for February was one that was absolutely terrible, and that was I Care a Lot. Now, this is the kind of film that really should have been great. I mean, it has an amazing cast, it has a really interesting premise, it's brilliantly shot, and it's totally the kind of thing that I normally go for. I mean, it's clever, it's funny, and it's kind of darkly comic and a bit witty. The trouble is, none of it worked. Essentially, this film is about Rosamund Pike, who plays this businesswoman who specialises in having isolated older people sent to care homes against their will, and after which she sells their homes and all their stuff and pockets all the money, while claiming she's using it all to pay for her care home fees. All of which, it turns out, is actually 100% legal in America, which is the kind of scary part about the movie and what the film's trying to point a finger at and say, this is a terrible, terrible thing. Only it turns out that one of the people that she kidnaps into a home isn't actually a lonely old rich woman at all. She's actually the mum of a Russian mobster hiding under an assumed name. So of course Peter Dinklage, who it turns out is, the Russian mobster who's her son, sets out to get her back while Rosamund Pike tries to keep her in there and tries to figure out a way to extort millions from Peter Dinklage. And all of this sounds like it should work in a really blackly comic way and could be quite interesting, yeah? Only it's not. It's just not funny. The film is not funny, even despite trying. And the film also seems to labour under this weird mistaken idea that the audience is going to be rooting for Rosamund Pike's character. But the whole first 10-15 minutes of the film basically shows her to be utterly irredeemable and horrible. And you spend the whole movie wanting Peter Dinklage to do something terrible to her because he actually comes off as a more sympathetic character. And there's a scene in the middle of the movie where they both come face to face when she gets captured by the mobsters. And you're hoping she's going to die horribly, or hell, I was hoping that she was actually going to be force-fed her equally horrible girlfriend who'd already been kidnapped by the bad guys. But no, everything's fine, and it goes all very silly in a really daft way, and after that it turns almost into a zany comedy where she's borderline some kind of like genius heist type person. I mean, the whole film is complete rubbish, and it's a real shame because it hasn't got the guts to go down the route of something dark like a McDonagh movie like In Bruges or something, or again like Bad Day for the Cat, which I mentioned earlier in this episode. But yeah, anyway, 2 out of 5. Don't even bother with this. It's I only give it 2 out of 5 rather than 1 because genuinely all the actors seem to be doing good work. I mean, there's not a bad performance in this, but the script is still absolutely terrible. So don't waste the 2 hours of your life on this film. Give it a skip. So that's all I've got for this month. Hopefully you enjoyed some of that and I gave you a few films and recommendations to see and a few things to avoid. So till next time, these have been my grumpy opinions. And a special thanks to all my patrons, and most especially my top tier patrons Judith Coloma, Laurie Laporte and Michelle Forbes. Thanks guys. Everyone keep it real, keep safe, and take care of yourselves. Bye bye.